Alright, so this one here is on the topic of loading an AVI file and not loading it into the brush as an anim brush, but rather loading it the usual traditional way as a current animation. And in fact, you see here an animation that was rendered in Anime Studio, and I imported it as an AVI file. Now in this case I imported the entire clip. That's what you can do now with this upcoming version 9 of PD Howler. When you go and load an AVI file, like so, from the animation menu, you'll select the file, and at this point it will ask you what starting frame do you want to go with and what end frame do you want to go to. So it's essentially previewing here the initial frame, and you want to make sure that the end frame is after the first frame. Otherwise you will be confused. So essentially you'll go, okay, let's say for instance you wanted the chicken just as he's entering. That's something you see a lot with particles also, and this one is a system of particles carrying chickens actually. But if you have particles and you do an animation perhaps of an explosion or snowfall or whatever it is, quite often you might have the particles initially invisible or at their starting emitting point, and the emitter hasn't started yet until you have gone through a couple of seconds or at least a couple of frames of the animation. And so the initial animation might not be usable. And so what you want to do is say, okay, I want to be in the midst of this animation already. Let's say we have about this much on the run, and then you see the end frame down here. You can enter that numerically, or you can go and say, okay, I need to go to about this much. So I'll be picking up frame number 55 all the way through number 30, and that's what that's doing. So now we have this ability to pick up this one sequence. Now let's say we use this actually to select just a very short sequence, and then we make it loopable, so, or we want to make it ping pong, basically back and forth. So let's say we want to have this as the starting frame, and we've already loaded it now, right? So you could either reload and re-enter the starting frame, or you can do that here. Now you can go from this to the last frame, select this in and out marker, and right click to delete this block you have just selected. And then you can do the same thing on the other end here at the beginning. You could say, okay, I will have the in marker here, and it'll go all the way to here. That's the part we want to cut out. So put the out marker and delete that block as well. So now we have an even smaller section. But what I'd like to do is now go ping pong on that. So imagine you have a poser animation sequence, or you have a DAZ Studio animation sequence, and you really like to have it go back and forth, or perhaps it's a walk sequence that the walk designer created, and it's a total of 4 cycles, but you only want one of them. So what you can do is exactly select the one that you want. They may all be identical, or they may even be slightly different, and one of them is the perfect one you'd like to catch out or take out from the rendered AVI file. It's actually pretty easy to do if you have it rendered as an image sequence, because you can say what's the start image and what's the end image, right? So that's another way to do it. But if you have just an AVI file to work with, this is where you can go now. So let's go to, again, load AVI and select the file, and say you want to start from about here where this chicken is exiting and this chicken is just entered, and then you want to find that same frame here, okay, and go a couple of frames across like this much, right? And then okay, so we have about 30 frames here, and these 30 frames I'm going to select the whole bunch. I'm going to select the first one, go all the way to the end, select the out. So I have now selected the first to the last frame, and I can copy that entire block. That block, not cut it, but copy it. And so I now have a copy of these frames. Now I'm taking these current frames and reversing that sequence, so they're now actually running backwards. There you go. And I'm going to the first frame and inserting the copied sequence that was not inverted. Okay, so I'm going to insert block before that current frame. And so what happens, you now have a first sequence of frames that was not inverted, and then you have the same sequence but inverted, so it's actually taking it backwards from there on. It's going forward, it's going to run backwards, as you can see here. Here's running forward, and then it's running backwards again. And so as you loop that, if you play this in a looping animation, you basically have them go like that. Now, that's another thing you can do if you have actually only half of the animation and you want it to kind of loop through. That's another way to do that. Alright, so that shows that new little feature of loading just a portion of the AVI file and that's new. We already had something similar to that in the brush menu under the animated brush, where you can actually load an AVI file also. Even if you have just the artist edition, you can load an AVI file into the animated brush, and with that you can go and, for instance, indicate, okay, I have a total of 200 frames that were found in that video, and I'd like to indicate I want to go from the start frame to about the middle frame, right? So that's another thing you can do to capture all that into the animated brush. You might want to store and manage a copy of that. For instance, one thing you could do is show the film strip, navigate through that to see what are the chicken there. They're not on transparent background, so you might want to change that, and do that by using the custom brush selection tool with the right click on that, and you can color key to that. So now the entire sequence is keyed to that pale blue as the background transparent color. Make sure you store that brush as a new one, store and manage it. And so now if you show the film strip on that one, you can see that, well, in this film strip preview it's not actually showing the plaid pattern with transparency. You're going to have to test that and trust that it's actually doing that across the frames. So let's go to the paintbrush tool. Let's get rid of this one and preview it, for instance. And if you have the preview, right now it's not showing it because, well, it's transparent. But as you're painting, if you're seeing this here, now it's going to carry the chicken image through your brush. And of course we need to have not just the image but the entire animation. Let's make it a little bit smaller on the step so it's going faster, and also higher on the opacity so we have the chicken fully opaque with it with a transparent background. Let's go and erase that. And that's actually a nice way to go and add more of those, right? So if you make it a little bit smaller, like so, and you have it all resampled, now you have actually that entire sequence you can tell inside your AVI. And you can play that not only across, let's reset it to full size. Let's set 100. Let's enter that precise value here. Actually, just do a reset there somewhere. Restore. Let's wait for resampling all this. And what you can do is you can render that entire sequence across not only this current one frame but the entire animation. So let's say we do a restore. There we go. And so here we are at the full size. Not quite yet. Oh, there it is. Alright, so I'm going to set the step distance to a very small so that it doesn't need much movement on my mouse to actually go and advance to the next frame. But so now what you can do is you can paint that with the Alt key. Remember that you can paint over the existing animation, and so it's adding to that, and quite a bit of mayhem here.